Jessica and Rashon. I just wanted to have this face-to-face time, um, talk about what you're working on and how we're going to put this together.
What I used as a springboard for inspiration for my piece, there's 4 short pieces. You have this really beautiful imagery of cotton, like it's just close-ups of cotton and it's black and white. So from there, I eventually just kind of found inspiration from my own immediate environment. Like I've been taking walks. So there was kind of inspired by the nature of it all.
Mhm.
But there's just a lot in those photos that you have. Yeah, just like the texture, like you can see the crunchiness of the leaves and the
Mm,
stems, and just the contrast and light between the cotton and like it's so like it's like a soft cloud, but then you have this hard shell.
Right.
But also just going through this year and the civil unrest and rest and the racial injustice on top of everything else going on in the world, and us having this reckoning with our history in this country. So seeing that cotton, like there's this kind of hum in the background of just realizing the history behind that cotton,
Right.
whatever that might be. So it's like, if you don't think too hard, it's this beautiful, hard shell with this soft, vulnerable inside. But then there's like just the realities that we're all having to face. So, um, yeah, that was my inspiration.
how did you come up with the title of Be in the Hollow?
Yes. So, um, you were talking about that sense of there being a hole inside of
Yeah.
you from this year.
Mm. Yeah,
So
John, before you
there,
got on, I was just saying how, I'll go through a day and do my thing and do what I could do and still feel this emptiness that I'm during this time. I don't know how to fill it. I don't know how to fill it. So,
so yeah, I agree. I have that feeling of there being kind of an emptiness that's like a well
yeah.
on the inside. But on top of that feeling, there is kind of this hum, this sort of buzz of like angst that has been this year for me. Um, for all of the reasons that, all the different things that we're going
You're
through.
shot.
So the idea of it being the hollow is, one way of describing that feeling. That
Yeah.
idea of
Crazy stuff.
it's buzzing in the hole. That's that forever empty that's in there.
So and we'll get to you, Rashawn, don't you worry. But
Yeah, no.
the the footage that you're putting together, we had talked about before you moved, uh, and it's totally fine. Whatever's changed is changed, but the landscape, I could put that in quotes, of New York versus the landscape of where you are in Colorado, the literal from there to here. And I'm wondering if that's something you're still working on, if that's how that might relate to the piece and Rashawn's photographs. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course there are those 4 photographs that were like a springboard of inspiration, but then there's just the actual program theme of, is it from here to there or from there to here?
Mm.
Because a lot has happened between this original commission when you reached out to me
Oh my gosh.
and now. So there's like a literal shift in reality, really. Like my entire world has changed, along with the landscape that I live in. Yeah, I'm temporarily living with family, and we're hunkering down for the winter during what's going to be really tough times. But yeah, I have footage from earlier in the year when I was living in the middle of the city, living in New York City, living that life, in comparison to where I'm at right now, where it's winter time and it's just very different. It's the prairie out here, right?
Mm.
Versus like the green urban setting of where I was at before. So there's just been so many different contrasts in my life overall. I mean, commuting to Lincoln Center versus working from home,
Yeah.
not being afraid of getting sick versus every day me worrying about my parents getting sick. You know, like there's just there's a lot of changes from here to there, from there to here. So
I'm very honored that there's somebody who has their own specific creative vision and ability, would find inspiration in something, that I took a photo of. Um, and at the time when I was taking these photos, it was literally like the treatment I sent. It was literally my dad and I just kind of walking around during Thanksgiving. It was during Thanksgiving time in South Carolina, and we were just going to check on this land that my grandparents own. And on this land, they've obviously switched to soybeans because soybeans are much more profitable than necessarily that field. And on that same field where there's no land, and he has all of these memories and stories as a kid. It's also soybeans now, which they're currently plowing and replanting, and cotton. And so I know from my experience, going to South Carolina as a kid, and then more specifically, I think because I live in Los Angeles here, and talking to my students, who've never been anywhere further than the West Coast. Um, a lot of them have no idea about, had any idea about, like, just obviously the importance of cotton, and literally have never ever seen it. And so
Mm.
I made sure, like, we went and we were walking around, and we just took a bunch of cotton and we drove it back to New Jersey. And he sent me a bundle through Federal Express, which is like, I was like, wow, this is sort of a story in itself. We went and took cotton from South Carolina, drove it to New Jersey, and he, Federal Expressed it, U.S. mailed it to me to California. And so when I broke out this bundle for the students, just literally just put it in my room. Um, some of the amazement in the photos as I look back on it, and you mentioned it, a lot of them just they wanted to see it, they wanted to touch it.
mhm.
Um, and I guess sort of taken for granted all of the time that I would go to South Carolina as a kid, and just see these open land and this open field and everything else, and sort of, seeing cotton fields. And if you drive in the South, you see, like, they have it in rows, so it kind of creates a very, I remember as a kid looking at this visual of this plotted land, and so you see different openings as you drive past it, and so it creates almost like I would almost it almost looks like a shuffling of cars, because you just see these openings, and it just rows and rows and rows um, of vegetables and cotton sometimes. And I think my students were sort of amazed at, like, just, can I actually touch it? And they was like, can I touch it? Like, I was like, yeah, go ahead and touch it. And so for a lot of them, and I'll kind of put it up here, they were just amazed at how rough, like, this part was. And so I'll explain, like, well, this part actually holds it. And then you kind of open it up. Well, this is the part you actually can't see. So it's funny. And so a lot of them were just amazed at how it looked. I think I'd have to turn off my virtual background
Yeah,
for you to see it
let's
when I
see
can do
it.
that.
Is there a way you
Yeah.
can take up
Yeah, I can do
virtual
it now.
background? That's awesome that you have the cotton.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
and
really
so I'll
is.
put it here. And so a lot of them were just like, "Oh, okay, well, they wanted to actually touch it and feel how rough it was." And then for a lot, and I'm not gonna say for a lot of them, having never had that experience, because there are obviously fields here in California, but for a lot of my students, never actually seen. And so they look and was like, well, that looks like what's in Rite Aid or what's in Walmart. And I was like, yeah, that's literally cotton. And so it was just a good experience for them to actually see it, touch it, feel it. Um, and I don't know. I think I look back on the photos and saying, well, it was just us kind of spending some time trying to get some firewood and just kind of being out there, and then looking at the visual. And then when he finally sent it to me in California, and I brought it to class and I brought it in my classroom, um, I think it just took on sort of its own identity in my classroom in a way. Like, I was hoping to just have some lights, and so I came up with the idea. And, like, if we were doing it physically in Boston, or in Cambridge, excuse me, as planned, my dad and I started creating. Funny enough, in California, I was like, well, I'm going to go and find me a glass jar to kind of hold the cotton itself, and then I'm going to get these Christmas lights. And so I put it together. I'll grab one. So I got one, and I was like, okay, well, it's not working, unfortunately. And so this is sort of, I got like a glass jar, and I kind of
Mm.
stuck the cotton in it, and then on the bottom there was like red Christmas lights, and so I would, come to class and plug it up. And so it basically took on the ideal that I was like, well, the cotton is itself, it's a plant. It stands on its own. And so the lights themselves were almost like it kind of put a little red tint on them. And so when I would talk to him, I was like, well, this is sort of my representation of the blood on the cotton. Because one of the things that a couple of movies have done pretty well and shown that and I'll pull this part, that when you pick this apart, when the slaves were pulling this apart, they had to do it fast. And so it instantly turned into a conversation piece with the kids so they understood something about the whole process. And so they had to pick it with speed. It wasn't out leisurely, pulling this cotton from the bushel. And so these parts at the top, if you see in that photo, like this is pretty hard and it's pretty sharp. And so as you pick the cotton, like you would literally be cutting your fingers, or your
Mm.
fingertips would just be cut and bleeding. And so the cotton would have, blood on them. And so I was explaining to them, like, so there was a whole process in cleaning the cotton. And before you make my cotton white shirt out of cotton, there was a whole process and the cotton gin in terms of cleaning it and separating and everything else. And so I had it, it's not lighting up now. I have to change the lights in it. But it was just like I was like, what's the conversation piece? Well, to me, it represents the power of cotton itself, and also um, the sacrifice and the punishment that this industry created um, for people who were brought here and forced to be a part of this process.
But when you look at your photographs, it really is a tactile experience. I mean, for
Well,
me, I don't know if you find that, Jessica, but like they're so provocative and they're
mm,
so,
thank you.
and it's amazing how you do that with a picture of a plant.
And so I think the importance of it was showing it up close, you know, and also showing the beauty of that plant. Like, if you're into agriculture and things, there's a certain beauty to things that grow out of the ground. You plant it, it grows, and so on and so forth. It does sort of speak to life. And then also, I felt like the black and white was also some of the stark, understandings of the history of this particular crop and how far it's gone. And so you use it to kind of make shirts and sweaters and hats and all of these beautiful things that people wear now, that you just stick in a machine and you get a product. And thinking about how far people have come based upon that. And also, I'll be very honest with you, and thinking about the fact that when you talk about reparations, you talk about things that sort of equate some sort of equality in terms of the suffering that had that was a result of it. It's like you sort of look at, wow, so you still have a flourishing industry that's still built off of the strength of this one crop, and you still have people who are sort of fighting for very simple equal rights written in the Constitution that was sort of written during that time period. And so, to me, I guess the importance of it is just like, okay, well, let's take a closer look at it.
Well, I was just thinking of also there's these dichotomies that are built into the program theme that you have, like from there to here, but then you have like cotton, where you have these extreme contrast of, softness and hardness, something that, is warm and cozy versus something that,
Right.
you can bleed from it, like it can break skin,
Yes.
and it's just there's so many different opposites. The fact that you chose to do black and white photography is also, it encapsulates that sort of essence of extremes, of opposites.
Yep.
This idea of blacks and whites, seeing the black point of the photo, like those shadows, there's something haunting about them,
Mhm.
and there's something about black and white photography that kind of alludes to history in a way.
Right.
Just it
That's
just
true.
kind of tends to do that, so it feels like something's being documented. But
Mhm.
at the same time, there's this artistic lens as well, because you see all this texture, especially the fact that you chose to do a close up of the cotton balls or bowls,
Bowls.
BOLL, the cotton balls. So they almost look like alien creatures, right?
Mm.
Like you just, and
Yeah.
it feels like wintertime, which also feels, it has a feeling to it. Like, I don't know if it's bittersweet. I don't know if it's nostalgia, but there's something that's kind of haunting about even the season that you managed to capture
Right.
this cotton. Because yeah, when I think of cotton in history, in American history, I think of like being hot and sweaty,
Right.
out there in the South. But to see the crispiness of the leaves, like just seeing these opposite textures, really, really interesting. And again, this theme of opposites that's happening, these dichotomies.
I'll thank you, Jessica, for adding color. You see something that you're sort of getting your inspiration from something in black and white, and I think about, and I'm so excited to hear what you created. Like it sort of adds its own tint or own color to that one photo, where it's like, okay, well, it's just you pick what parts to, like you said, look sort of brown, but it still has that tinge of being black and white, and then like I think whatever you've been able to create from it, it adds the color, it adds sort of the context. Because I think that I'm really inspired and just kind of excited to hear what you heard or what you saw from it, and what you were able to create from looking at it. I think a lot of times, because you're talking about people who are working at different forms of art, like you take a photo, you're sort of capturing it from that moment, and for you to be a creative artist who can kind of create to fill in the blanks, between the different colors. It's inspiring to me. Um, so I thank you. I'm sort of I'm looking forward to this partnership lasting much longer than the presentation, because I think it would kind of resonate. So thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this. I know that's going to be really beautiful, just knowing Rashon's work. So this is going to be great.